do is go out there and spread the word about what we're doing, what we've done, what our challenges are, what our celebrations are, and how much more we have to do. And when Melissa asked for me to join, I said, well, I'm happy to join, but I could not do it without Chris Sanders. Chris has been my bio, I think, is a little more lengthy just because I'm wordy. I'm sorry, Ethel, but but Chris, I stand on shoulders for sure. His leadership has been really at the forefront of issues in Tennessee back when I was a kid and thought there's never going to even ever be a way that I can get married in Tennessee. Chris was one of the people who helped to fight for that right. And so thank you to him. And I wanted him to be here to share his experiences and all the hard work that TEP does. So all that to say, all of our organizations really work very closely together during legislative sessions, and particularly with the onslaught in the last few years, and even it heightened this year, arguably maybe our worst year, Chris. I mean, I think, and it's really important, obviously, that we work really well within our coalition and that we respect each other's missions and we uplift each other in those missions. And so Chris has done a really excellent job of that. And I hope that the Tennessee Pride Chamber has as well. Of course, we again work with other organizations like Inclusion Tennessee and ACLU and Stonewall Bar Association. And we'll talk about some of those things as we go through here. But just a little bit of background about the chamber, and then I'll hand it over to Chris to give us back a little bit more background about TEP and himself. But the Pride Chamber represents hundreds and hundreds of businesses across the entire state. Our main mantra is to advocate, educate, and connect. Those are exactly what you would imagine that they would be. Here I am facilitating my role as the chair of the Advocate Committee, which is mostly government relations, as well as educate, which is to inform people about, again, what we're doing out here. The chamber was established over 25 years ago. Many of our founders are still very active in the community, including Nancy Van Rees, who's the chair of the Metropolitan LGBT Caucus, and then others who I'm sure are just everywhere, so which is wonderful. Last year, actually, at the very end of last year, we went from being the Nashville Pride Chamber to being the Tennessee Pride Chamber. And that was based on a lot of feedback from our folks across the state who said, hey, look, we're members and you're still called Nashville Chamber. Why is that? And so we have expanded, and that has provided us an opportunity to not only grow, but to learn more about some of the challenges our friends in the LGBT community, particularly in the LGBT business community, deal with every day, from Ray County to Davidson, right? So that is what we have done. And again, we can't do this without our partners, and we certainly stand on shoulders in the advocacy world. We, as a part of that growth, for the first time hired a lobbyist this year to help us work alongside TEP and ACLU and others. And that standing on shoulders is an excellent segue for me to hand it over to Chris to give you a little background on the Tennessee Equality Project.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank all of you for having us today. Anytime I run into someone who says, I'm with the League of Women Voters in Nashville, I say, oh, I love your Instagram account. And I do, because you all share all the good things. It's a source of incredible information. If any of you on here who are members are not accessing that Instagram account, I would highly recommend it, because it will help keep you caught up with what's going on. I always enjoy seeing what you're posting, because I learn about what's going on in Nashville, and you all have been kind enough to share some of our things, certainly since its existence. So thank you for all your work in the community. We were founded because the marriage amendment was working its way through the legislature back in 2004. But we remained because that same year they started introducing bills that restricted our adoption rights. And over the years, there have been a number of twists and turns in the legislation that affects the LGBTQ community. There have been bills that affect curriculum. There have been bills that affect healthcare. There are ongoing bills on marriage, and we'll talk about some of those in a minute, but I'm telling you this to tell you why we still exist. You know, I remember the days when we had dreams of grand federal legislation passing, and we would go out of business, be put out of work. We used to, a lot of us in the movement around the country used to use that sort of phrase. I do wish that progress were always linear, but it's not, because progress retreats, takes twists and turns. There is an ongoing need for organizations that serve various communities that are attacked through public policy. And unfortunately, our community is one of those that is on the firing end of a lot of bad legislation. So I say that again to say, this is why we continue to exist. It's not that we want to exist. It's not that we go out and try to gin up business. The business is there for us. It's so vital that we have a variety of organizations serving the community. You may wonder, why would we need a gay rugby team? Why would we need separate bars? Why would we need a pride festival? We need these things because there are all these forces of shame coming at our community. And Pride is a month where we highlight the resilience of the community and all the ways that we thrive, our challenges, and the joy that we have in being together, being who we are. So we'll get into the legislation in a minute, but I wanted to give Joseph a chance to recap anything in transition before we did that, if he wanted to pick up any point.
I'm going to stop muting myself. You encapsulated that very well. Thank you. And, the only thing I would add is exactly and precisely. And not only, I mean, I in my personal professional life, am a lobbyist and government relations consultant. And, sometimes in any given issue, you have to kind of look for, as Chris says, not drumming up problems, but kind of saying, hey, here's the problem that we can fix. The problems are plentiful. And so it has not only continued to require and necessitate the existence of these things, as Chris has said, but even an expansion of these things. And so that's why, again, you've seen organizations like ours for the first time in this last year hire, professional lobbyists beyond our own advocacy, just like Chris has as well. So I'll turn it back over to you to run through the list of the issues.
Yeah.
and the LGBT issues are not my behavior on the weekends at our
Right, that's right. Well, they may be, but we won't get into them. So
those aren't changing yet.
right, that's right. I'm going to put in the chat, for those of you who can see it, a link that will have a big list of bills. And these are the biggies that were, for the most part, most of that list is attack bills that hit our community. I'm not going to go through each one of them. I'm going to hit 4 issue areas that I think will illustrate. The top 2 that I hit, I think you probably would have heard in media reports. And one is the bill that bans gender affirming care for trans youth. This was the first bill that was filed in the legislative session, in House and Senate. First bill filed. It was also filed by the House Majority Leader and the Senate Majority Leader. So the timing, the position, and also who filed it sent a very strong signal that there was an intention to pass these bills and make them a priority. That bill has been signed into law. The ACLU of Tennessee and others are challenging that legislation in court right now. There has not been a ruling on that yet, but in a number of other states, there have been successful court challenges to that type of a law. The effect of this bill is quite devastating. It is causing parents to have to consider whether to move out of state or how they're going to manage healthcare trips for their children. It is causing healthcare providers to, even before the law takes effect, to get out of the work of providing this care altogether. And it is just having an overall horrible effect on trans and non-binary people of all ages in the state, because it is legislation that hits at the very being of people's gender identities. Another bill you will have heard about in the media is the drag restriction bill. Sometimes headlines call it a drag ban. Strictly speaking, the attorneys will tell you that's not the case. But the restrictions are heavy, and there is a vagueness about the bill that has a chilling effect that makes everyone who is including drag as part of their events to think twice about how to incorporate it and not get arrested. This bill, there was a suit filed against it by attorney Bryce Timmons and the organization Friends of George's out of Memphis. And enforcement of that law is currently enjoined. This was also one of the first bills filed in the legislative session. And on the Senate side, it was also carried by the Senate Majority Leader, again, signaling a sort of priority for this issue. Now, two more bills I want to talk about briefly. You may or may not have heard about, but they're also very important. One is a bill we call the Student Pronoun Bill. And this bill says that school personnel, principals, teachers, teachers' aides, don't have to use a student's pronouns if the pronouns don't correspond to what is on the student's original birth certificate. In other words, if you're a transgender student, if you're a non-binary student, and you use pronouns different from the pronouns you would have gotten at birth, school personnel in public schools don't have to use that pronoun. This is a horrible law that enables adults to fight with and bully kids about their identities. If you step back from this, it's really just mind-blowing that we're saying to school personnel, yeah, we know what the kid says, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to respect their identities. If you want to, argue with the kid, you can do that. You can refuse to use the pronoun. I can't think of anything that creates a more hostile school environment for kids who are already struggling with bullying and misunderstanding in so many quarters of life, and then to have to go to school it's really troubling. But that's one of them. A fourth bill is the bill that we call the anti-trans binary definition of sex bill. And Joseph, I believe you said there was some particular interest in this bill. This may be the SB 1440. At this point, I can't call out the bill numbers. During the legislative session, I could have called them out in my sleep, but I believe I understood you correctly, Joseph, in saying that they wanted some discussion of this bill. Was that correct?
That's correct.
Very good. We'll briefly go into this one. This bill goes to the top of the Tennessee Code, and it uses the word sex, and it defines it in a way that excludes trans people. It defines sex based upon immutable biological characteristics and what's on someone's original birth certificate. Why might that be troubling to trans and non-binary people? Well, this bill, by defining the word sex throughout the code, really sets up a legal minefield for trans people that eventually could affect whether they can change the gender marker on their driver's license. It could affect the housing of incarcerated persons. It could affect domestic violence housing. It could affect the implementation of non-discrimination measures. It could affect any number of things. We don't know every single area it could eventually affect. Now, do I think the effect will be immediate on July 1? No, I think these changes will have to go through the administration's rulemaking process and through the Government Operations Committee and the legislature. But the problem is, one, we don't know what it will affect, and two, we don't know when. So imagine you are a trans or non-binary person trying to prepare for this. It's extremely troubling. Now, why is a little thing like a driver's license important? I don't know about you, but I've been pulled over for having a tail light out in Nashville. Well, imagine you're trans or non-binary and can't get the gender marker changed on your driver's license, and you get pulled over for a tail light, and the officer looks at your license and says something doesn't add up here. And that particular officer had not been gone through diversity training or whatever. Those are the kinds of interactions, unfortunately, that can escalate for people when their ID doesn't match their gender identity. So that's just one small example that could really lead to devastating consequences for someone. I'm going to stop there. So you all can ask questions or make comments, but I just wanted to lay out those 4 bills so you could get a flavor of the different areas that anti-LGBTQ legislation is taking right now. And Joseph, I hope you'll fill in any blanks that I left out.
So I'd like you to provide a little bit more context around the driver license issue specifically, because I think that, these are some of the minutia of life that become writ large when and I believe that Tennessee right now is one of maybe 2 states in the country that do not permit the changing of assigned at birth gender on the birth certificate, but you can petition to have it corrected for your driver license. Is that accurate?
You can get your driver's license gender marker changed right now. That is correct, but not your birth certificate if you were born in Tennessee.
Yeah.
If you live in Tennessee but were born in another jurisdiction, in most of those jurisdictions, there is a process whereby you can change the gender marker. And I know the argument we always get, it's an historical document. Why should it be able to be changed? Well, what matters is that it's connected to a current person. The sex part is really not essential. I mean, and especially on things like a driver's license. I mean, you'll forgive me for being crude, but one of the better comebacks I've heard is, you don't use sex organs to drive, so why does it matter what the gender marker is on your driver's license? And that's as crude as I will get today. I apologize, but it's Friday. But we do need to step back and think about why we're even asking for this kind of information on these documents to begin with.
Yeah.
And then using it as a basis to discriminate and sort people and what they're allowed to do and not do. But because we do it, because there is a gender marker on a driver's license, if it doesn't match the person's identity and appearance and so forth, it can cause trouble.
Yeah. And one thing I'd like for our people on the call to also know, this is something that I share through a LGBT training that I provide for Caterpillar, is that what the doctor sees at birth is not always accurate. And intersex, I don't know what, intersex happens about as often as people exist with red hair. So it's not a rarity. And if you're assigned at birth based on visuals, that may change over time as the child develops. And there might be both sex organs generally associated with male or female present in the body. That is not confirmed until, some chromosomal testing, or, there's an issue at puberty where things aren't developing as they expected because the doctor said, well, it's a small penis, but we're going to call it a penis when it's actually not, So that's an important distinction for people to understand in Tennessee, is that a child could be then, to use an ugly moniker, branded for life with the wrong sex, so to speak.
Joseph, did you want to fill in anything that I might have left out in discussion of those bills, or another bill you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I would, if you wouldn't mind giving a little bit of a background and kind of a current status of the drag queen bills. I think that that's one more that folks have definitely had a lot of interest in.
Right. So there were two drag bills. One of them passed, and that's the one that Bryce Timmons and the Friends of George's group in Memphis sued over. And enforcement is currently enjoined, I believe, through June 6th. I don't know when we will get the next round of rulings. I think before June 6th, but I'm not absolutely certain. They've certainly both sides have presented their arguments. And again, it's popularly called a drag ban, and I understand why people do that. The attorneys that I've talked to said, no, it's not. And as I read the bill, it doesn't outright ban drag, but it makes the situation vague enough where it scares people from wanting to include drag in their events or to ask a lot of questions. And the chilling effect is the point. But right now, enforcement of that law is enjoined. There are similar laws being passed around the country. And that really strikes at a number of things. It strikes certainly at our community, but everyone should understand it as a First Amendment issue as well. Speech and expression and the types of assemblies that we're allowed to have. It hits at all the important issues in the Bill of Rights. And I think that's a path for anyone who understands. You may not happen to like drag shows, but there are certain foods that I don't like, but I don't think they ought to be banned. And I think that's the way we ought to approach speech and expression in this country. It is one of our most cherished freedoms, and I hope we can all look at the issue through the First Amendment lens. But right now it's enjoined.
So all that to say, drag is not a crime in Tennessee. and I can't say that enough. Although because of the great reaction that this got from many folks, and again, they passed a bill, and most everyday Tennesseans probably don't understand that, including myself, until I get confirmation from an attorney or someone else, the intricacies of the legal system when a bill passes. So the result of that is that there's a lot of confusion out there, and that confusion isn't just amongst everyday citizens, it's also amongst elected and local government appointed officials who provide things like permits for pride festivals and raffle tickets for events that you might have that feature a drag performer. And so I'll say that as the chamber, we have seen a lot of Again, confusion, frustration. People are scared. And I don't mean just drag performers. I mean trans people who are afraid that they'll be walking to the grocery store and be arrested because, you know, they're in a dress and were born with different genitalia than they have their pronouns now. So, you know, it's, you know, just because something is stayed at a court doesn't mean that everybody's just like, oh, well, it's easy now. No, I mean, there's a lot of fear and confusion. I mean, I know personally friends who have left the state because of this fear and the fear of what could come next. So I think maybe at this time, unless Chris, you have others that you wanted to talk about, it might be good to take kind of a pause and us just talking to y'all and get any more questions you have about those bills specifically.
So questions in the group? I mean, Karen and I always have questions, so but we'll give some others a chance here.
Love it. Always happy to answer questions.
Okay, well, in the lull, while they're thinking, can you tell, you know, it is so hard to follow the Title IX stuff with schools and sports and participation. And I wondered if you could kind of break it down for us about what's the current status in Tennessee with regards to sports, physicals, you know, all of the things that have been floating around with that issue and trans or non-binary children.
Right. The simple answer is that Tennessee has passed a number of statutes barring trans people from participating in sports based on their gender identity. There is a different interpretation of Title IX operative at the federal level, and some of those regulations are being worked out. So I can't give you a definite answer at this point. But I will say that the Biden administration and their Department of Education see some options for trans people to participate in public school sports under certain conditions, and those rules are being worked out. You know, the big discussion is about unfair advantage and how that's worked out, but there have been standards at the college level and at the Olympic level, and we think the same thing could be done certainly at the school level, and that is being worked on, and that rulemaking process is ongoing. I don't know whether that will be completed in the next 60 days or not. I have not kept track. Our expert on that, Darren Johnson, is on medical leave right now, but she is a trans athlete. She's a cyclist, and she is absolutely up to date on all of that information. So in the future, if you'd like to have a program with Darren to talk about the trans athlete issue in a few months, I know she'd be glad to do that for the group and facilitate a discussion. Joseph,
Great.
do you have anything to add on that one?
No, that encapsulates it really well.
So to ask about that, since Title IX is federal, that is not something that the state can override. This is a federal Title IX issue.
Well, if we were back in 1976, I would have said yes. But what we have now are a large number of states banding together to try to highlight the 10th Amendment over the 14th.
I get it. Okay. Yeah.
And they are determined to reassert states' rights in a number of areas. So I agree with you, but that is not the end of the debate, and many states do not see it that way.
So we have had to deal with the same thing with the Dobbs decision and in Tennessee, and then what Tennessee has done and where they went, which is that maybe they won't throw doctors in jail if they save a woman who's, you know, about to die from a pregnancy, which is just so nice of them. So I'm just don't imagine anything happening locally, so to speak, to deal with that. And so therefore, the quote 10th Amendment thing will have to be duked out for a whole bunch of us, like all of us, from any humans, it seems to me. And so when I hear that, you know, I hear that there are, you know, I'm assuming Arkansas is like one of the first places where this thing where a lot of this stuff happened with trans stuff, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So if we go state by state, it'll just we'll get frittered into. I mean, we'll just use up all of our energy. So I'd love to know how to, you know, take Arkansas, Tennessee, Texas, and a number of us, and like all together, you know, make a concerted effort at dealing with this. But it could be that that's just asking for how do we go tilt at some more windmills, which is I tend to be a person, so you know.
Here's my short answer on this. The reason fighting bad laws in red states is so important is if the laws don't pass, and sometimes they don't, then there's nothing for their state attorney general to sign on to defend with other states that have passed similar laws. And that weakens the overall thrust of those red state attorneys general trying to work against federal law. In other words, every time we stop a bad law in Tennessee, that weakens this mass of red states that are passing these things, and they're trying to pass them in order to undo rights for all of us at the federal level. So there is every reason, as hard as it is, for us to work against oppressive laws in these states. And sometimes we win still. I'll give you an example. There was a bill this year that would have said, it was filed as a caption bill and later got amended with this awful amendment. And it said, any place that could be construed as a campground or a camp must have trans-exclusive restroom policies. Fortunately, we were able to pull in progressive religious camps to work privately on the committee chairs where that bill would have gone through, and they were able to stop those bills. But that's the kind of far-reaching bill that if it passed here and then it passed in 6, 7, 8, 9 other states, suddenly you've got this critical mass of states that can work together against federal rights that are developing for our community nationally. So I think it's so important that we not give up in hard states. Joseph, what are your thoughts?
I agree. And, you know, also it continues to get, and this is a little bit more granular than that. Chris, that was the perfect of the big picture, but on the day-to-day local picture, I mean, something to consider, and a little bit off topic, but, you know, a lot of times folks will say, you know, to us, well, oh, those horrible Republicans, they're terrible, you know. Well, we work in a world that is a super majority of Republicans. And so there's no way that you can get anything done unless you work with them. That's just mathematically impossible. And so kind of one of the challenges is what I call creating safe spaces for those folks, right? Whether that's an excuse to not vote for something because it has a business impact, right? Or it has some sort of other effect. You know, you find that going into some of these offices and saying, you know, and some advocates choose this path to, you know, basically go in there and say, you know, you're a fascist and you're a Nazi and shame on you. And, would you want to do anything that person had to suggest? Probably not, And so continuing to push any agenda and to tell our story and to tell and to amplify the stories of trans people and the experiences that everyone in the LGBTQIA plus community, it continues to promote that education and awareness and potentially create those more safe spaces. And so even in the darkest states, even in the most troubling ones, including our own, right? I mean, I've been in Tennessee my whole life. I love this state. I'm very sad about it right now. I'm very disappointed in our leadership. But I'm not going anywhere because the fight is here. When you see Allison Russell, who's a performer and who helped put together, basically led the charge to put together, I'm sure you all may have heard of the Love Rising concert that happened kind of on the onset of some of these drag bills, raised a little over $500,000 in one night. Amazing, huge thing. And she received an award last night at our awards ceremony for the chamber. And she said, a lot of times the people at the crossroads and at the cross sections of these fights, they see the page the clearest. And the page is not pretty. But having the strength and being willing to stand at those crossroads and make those points there in those most uncomfortable conversations, not just for us, but for everybody. That's where the most important work happens. And so, doing it everywhere, including the good places, is important.
So one of the things that I'm realizing is that one of the days that I was at the legislature, and there were 2 or 3, they're moms. I'm a mom, and about a couple of them have children who were being seen by and cared for locally. And as soon as this bill passed, they were dropped in the middle of their care. In the middle of their care. And I mean, it was just, they were there, and it made me so angry because they're also already on the edge, and their children got dropped by very, very well-placed, very well, or, funded institutions that don't have the, anyway. So and then to say, what does it mean I'm angry. I tell everybody that, but it also isn't the case that I expect that poor woman who told me, barely able to stand because she was so freaked out about her daughter. I don't even know what to, I can't speak for her, but I can't make her speak also because she's already just at her wit's end. So that's, I think, what I'm also trying to figure out. Like, I understand the legislation, and I also understand, I could, when it comes to women's autonomy over their bodies and reproductive health, I went through this, I'm old enough that I went through this. This is like new. This isn't new. This is exactly. And the only thing that we did was we had money and we took people. We took them to places where it was safe. Or you left. You just left.
And that's going on now.
Yes.
A few things I can tell you. There was no shortage of parents of trans kids who spoke with their own legislators around the state this year. And sometimes you can't overcome the wind. The wind blew in such a way this year where that bill was going to pass. But their conversations with those lawmakers were not in vain, because that will help eventually on some other bill that attacks trans kids. The other thing that this makes me think of is, most of you live in Nashville. There may be a few of you who live in some neighboring counties who are members of the Nashville League of Women Voters. One of the things Nashvillians can do is think about their friend list and help activate people in Hendersonville, Franklin, Ashland City, Lebanon, in these neighboring areas, because those are the legislators who need to be worked on by people in those districts. And Joseph has probably heard me preach this sermon 1,000 times, but really, I think everybody in Nashville has friends in the neighboring cities. Everybody I know does. They know people in these cities, Murfreesboro and on and on and on. These are the friends you need to pull in and get engaged with their legislators.
Yeah. And I have heard this sermon many times, and it's one of my favorite sermons because, you know, it goes to that question of, hey, what do we do to help? And a big part of that is just show up and participate and to offer that help and that allyship, right? You know, not everybody has the strength to do that, and that's fine. You know, I've always made it a big point whenever I hear someone saying, oh, well, so and so did this event and they did that event, but they didn't show up for the signing of, you know, we're not here to, I don't think anybody's doing anyone any justice if we're evaluating each other's, you know, advocacy, right? Every bit helps, you know, particularly if you're just trying to be critical. But Chris is right. Those comments like about, you know, it's important to introduce folks to tell their genuine stories to these legislators. I mean, I can't tell you when I started working at the legislature, gosh, in 2007 in the clerk's office, and then beyond. I mean, later I became, you know, the director of legislation at the state comptroller's office. So I was in almost every single one of these representatives' offices. And I can't tell you how many times I heard, particularly from freshman legislators, you know, you're the first openly gay person I've ever met. And one, to me, I'm like, really? You know, and also in my mind, I'm like, that's probably not true. You just didn't realize or didn't ask. But and then the questions come, you know, and they find this safe space where they're like, let me ask you, you know, about pronouns, or let me ask you, you know, and so those contacts are just so important. It takes it's a little bit harder to spit in the face of someone that you know, if you have a face with that idea of, you know, drag queens, evil, you know, manipulating children, you know, have you met a drag queen, you know, and sitting down with one and being like, okay, you're just a regular human just like me, and in more fabulous clothes, right? So some of them not, some of them just like me, you know, and that's wonderful as well. But yeah, I mean, all of that intersectionality is super important, and those contacts are super important.
So Joseph, we have a question in the chat, speaking of pronouns. Do you have any, you know, pulse or finger on the inside knowledge about, you know, where are teachers at in terms of the pronoun issue? Has this, like, are you hearing anything from, you know, the NEA or anything on this? Are they supportive? Although, and the question goes on, although seems worthy in principle, seems like one more thing that a teacher needs to, you know, remember or stay informed on. How would teachers know a child's pronoun, and how would these rules apply in, say, elementary school?
So, you know, and Chris, I'd love to hear if you've had any contact with NEA or TEA. I have not. I'll tell you that the general census I get, I'd say that it probably depends, and this is just me taking my most educated guess based on conversations I've had with leaders in the education community, but I think that it would depend on where you are, right? You know, I think that some of the more rural schools, I mean, you're going to find teachers who have never had to deal with this, and they're going to say, I don't want to have to do that. I think that the more or the less rural you get. So, I mean, I know I've heard from a lot of teachers in Nashville and Memphis through the organizations that we exist in, right? That they say, you know, gross, you know, why would you disrespect a child like that in an environment? And that not only, you know, teachers are aware of bullying. They have been for a very long time. And so, you know, to insinuate that they should and must in some proposals be a part of that bullying is just so a total 360 of a paradigm shift. I'll also tell you that, and a lot of the legislators have seen this. I'm sure that Chris has seen this as well. They've released, as legislators do, they've got these polls that have gone out to their constituencies, and they've said, where are you on these 4 or 5 issues? And I'll tell you that the issues that teachers care about right now are guns. They care about guns and the safety of kids, and the fact that they're afraid to go to work. And so, when you can get a conversation about this on some people, but I think, again, beyond the fact that, there is a concerted effort to demonize LGBT people. And frankly, it's one that we've seen before. This is the songbook of Anita Bryant. We have been here before. And, a lot of people in the generation right after me, I'm 39, but, the younger gay people who I see in LGBT folks moving to Nashville and getting involved in these organizations, they don't recall the fact that the generation right before me, half of them died because of negligence of government and healthcare. And in my generation, again, I grew up most of my life thinking I had one option: to pray it away or die a drug addict in an alley, homeless. And that was what I thought were my options. And then, you get beyond that and you meet other people, and things did get better for me. And honestly, to a degree, they got, I remember the day that marriage equality happened and I was being interviewed. I was the president of Pride on that time, and that was a fun Pride. But, I remember a reporter said, well, so is the LGBT agenda finished? Are you done? And I remember thinking, well, wow, okay. And then I thought, well, of course not. And I said, of course not. And, went down the list of our trans brothers and sisters are being killed at a higher rate than almost anyone, particularly those who are people of color. And, just kind of went down this list. I could get fired today for being a gay person in this state. So could Chris. That would probably not happen, I hope, because you work for the Tennessee Equality Project, but it's possible. And, so of course the agenda is not over, but one of the things that I know that you all have seen with women's issues as well, and a lot of times we align our issues because we're attacked on the same principles, unfortunately, and with a theme of dehumanization, which we've all got tough skins because of. But when somebody or some group of somebody's does something so egregious, and so mean, that is really disheartening. But then one thing that I've always seen now, working in this almost 2 decades, is that the opposite reaction is that people step up and people come out of the woodwork. And, I've been really impressed with this younger generation who's like, wait a minute, this is unbelievably wrong, and showing up. And I don't mean just LGBT people. I mean straight families and families with children, and not trans children, just your everyday cis straight families showing up, livid. As mad as I am, and they should be. It's like when any of our rights are compromised, all of our rights are compromised. And so that's been one of the really encouraging things. And I'll say, one of the things I know we have like 8 minutes left, I believe, but one of the things I wanted to point out, Pride is always, of course, about celebration, but also about recognizing how far we have still to go. And we focused a lot on how far we have still to go and what some of the problems are, but there are some major things to celebrate as well. And some of those, just as an example, in Nashville, for this last 4-year term of council members, we have had, out of the 40 council members that are up there, 5 are LGBT people. We have an entire LGBT caucus. That is a major accomplishment. And here, now that the filing deadline is gone and the withdrawal period has passed for candidates to run this August for Metro Council seats, we have 9%. So we have about 12 people of that full candidate slate who is running as openly LGBT candidates. And that is also, whether they win or not, that is a major accomplishment. And we already know that we'll have at least 2 people on Metro Council who will be LGBT again this next term, and maybe more. We do have an LGBT person who serves in the House for Memphis. We used to have two. One quit, honestly, because his party was so horrible to him. And he'll tell you that just for being gay. But, you know, we've got a Democrat up there who's LGBT to speak on those issues. And all that goes to say that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And you've heard that before because it's real. And so having that representation is a major benefit. And some other positive things in the last few weeks, you know, with all of the influx of money and fundraising that many of our organizations got from Love Rising and just awareness of the issues that have been elevated in this last year, is that we have been able to provide some very specific services to the community, to the business community, and being now a statewide chamber to some of the rural communities. This year, for the very first time, we announced about a week and a half ago that 6 different prides will receive grants to combat some of the confusion with some of those local officials that we discussed. A lot of those pride events happened this weekend. Chris and I were talking about some of them. I'll list them off here just so that you know, but Upper Cumberland Pride, Franklin Pride, Columbia Pride, all those happening this weekend have received grants. Borough Pride, so Murfreesboro Pride, Jackson Pride, and Tri-Cities Pride, which is called Tri-Pride. Those are all in September. They've received grants as well, and those are literally going specifically to help mitigate some of these problems. And it's not just problems with, you know, local clerk's offices denying permits and things like that. It's also vendors, people who have typically bought a space and had a presence at these Pride festivals say, oh gosh, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if someone's going to create some weird business loophole where I can lose a license. I mean, those are the kind of bullying tactics that are being told to folks right now. And so we've been able to help provide some assistance in that way. And actually here, this is a little bit of a before the fray of the public sphere, but we did a soft announcement last night at our award center, and I'm happy to share it here, that we are working with the Stonewall Bar Association and others, as well as some of the biggest names in the legal community, and also some very well-established smaller boutique firms, to provide across the state a legal defense fund to help with these issues. And these are for businesses, for prides, for individuals, you know, who are having issues with this. And so, you know, if you don't, please follow both of our organizations on all of the socials. We're at TN Pride Chamber on all of them, from LinkedIn to Instagram to Facebook. And you can also find all of those links on our website, which I'll plug right here in the chat as well. And there will be more updates on those services and others, how you can refer people once that one is, the legal fund is fully running, and how you can, if you know folks who have a law firm that would like to dedicate some hours. We've got tens of thousands of hours already dedicated across the state in pro bono legal services, and the chamber will provide personal expenses, traveling, et cetera, within this program as well. So those are some exciting things to celebrate amongst this madness.
So, by the way, one of the things that happens with this is that we end up putting this in the Nashville Voter, that is our newsletter. So a number of these things will also be there, not just what we talked about, but also pointers. So that goes out. And of course, we have, as Chris pointed out, and thank you so much, because our social media folk are so nice and they're so young compared to some of us. It's really lovely that someone else other than, you know, me in particular, is like, I can't believe you did this. It's so wonderful. So anyway, thank you so much for saying that, Chris, because they are like the little elves that make things work. You like elves.
That's great. Yeah.
I'm going to drop 2 links in real quick. I've dropped one just showing how we're preparing for the next legislative session. The next one is our surveys of candidates. That this includes no endorsing information, no preferential treatment. So I would understand if you couldn't share that, but I wanted to share it with you so that you would have candidate answers on LGBTQ issues. And that is also in the link for you.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, this has been an informative afternoon at the very start of Pride Month for the world and Tennessee. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come and meet with us. I'm sure that there is, a lot of information that is shared today is often, the first time people have heard about this. I am, when I do training at my employers, there are a lot of people who just are not as well versed or exposed to the many issues that face, all marginalized communities, or they don't recognize that intersection that really does come down to affecting us all. And, you really said it best with, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So when we look at that from the, that standpoint, it really does provide there are multiple avenues for personal impact and activity for league members. So we'll put that out there for people to know what resources are there. And, as I like to say, when we know better, we do better. So that's what we'll keep marching on. So thank you again for today, and thank you for everyone joining us. And we will not be having a July hot topic. We'll be back again with a vengeance in August. So watch the voter for our next hot topic, and have a wonderful weekend, everyone. And we'll see you soon. Thanks,
Thank
Chris.
you all.
Thanks,
Joseph.
Joseph. Really appreciate it.
Guys, thanks, Melissa. Appreciate y'all.
So Melissa, are we going to start like figuring out August?